All right, so welcome everyone. I am Megan, your book club host, and I am here with Dave Finch down here and Dr. Prizant over here. Welcome.
Barry.
Dr. Barry Prizant over here. So welcome. Dave is a best-selling author, is a speaker, and Dave, it looks like you've spoken at every college in America. Based on your website, it's like this ticker of just all of the places that you've spoken. So that's impressive. I'm impressed. And you are a mountain biker.
It's true.
And you are a writer, and you've been in you're in the New York Times, Huffington Post, Zoom. Is that a magazine?
Yeah, it's an Autism magazine.
Okay, I need to check that out. I'm going to write that down. So Zoom and other places, and you have your own blog, and you do all of the things.
It's fun for me. All of this is accurate, by the way, and it all started because essentially my wife said you need to start writing, so I did, and it felt like free therapy. And then I lobbed something up to the New York Times, and I said, "Here's an essay that I wrote, and I think you should publish it." And so they did, and then it just went from there.
They were like, "Yeah, this is fantastic."
Yeah, exactly.
And your book is called The Journal of Best Practices,
a
memoir of marriage, Asperger's syndrome, and one man's quest to be a better husband. And my mom thinks it is hilarious, and she loves it, and she's just going on and on about it. So, yeah.
I appreciate that. See, I love readers like your mom who get way into it and then are just like having a ball with it. Because really, I just wrote it to make people laugh. I really didn't write it to help anybody.
And she did. Yeah, she says he is so funny. Like all of the things that he says is just so funny and relatable, and
wow.
And just men.
Somebody, Dave Barry, who is also obviously a far more successful humor writer, but Dave Barry wrote one of the blurbs for the book, and he said Asperger's is in some ways a condition about just being a guy. So I thought that was a pretty clever.
She's telling me all of these different things. So just so you know, I do run a book club, but I don't usually get through all of the books.
Yeah, same.
True confessions.
Huh?
True confessions.
It is, yeah, it is. I mean, and it's not a secret. I do try, but a lot of the times, when Mona De La Hook came on, my mom was like, "Okay, read chapter 4, 7, and 8, and then you'll be good."
So she's like aiding and abetting. This is great.
Yeah, she is. Yeah, she is. So it's but she loves your book.
Oh, that's amazing.
And I'm gonna read it because she loves it so much. If she says it's good, then it's really good. So is there anything I forgot about you?
No.
Okay. And Dr. Prizant is here. Dr. Barry Prizant is here. And Dr. Prizant is a clinical scholar with more than 40 years of experience, a researcher, a consultant, speech and language pathologist, and one of the developers of the CERTS model that is used in lots of public schools around the nation and maybe in other countries. And is the author of Uniquely Human, A Different Way of Seeing Autism, and lots of other things. Your bio is 2 pages long. You're
I've
amazing.
been for a long time. Yeah.
This is the book here, Uniquely Human, and the links are in the comment section. So, what did I forget, Dr. Barry? What did I forget, Barry?
Oh, I don't know. I like to fish. I'm learning how to be a comedian from Dave. Let's see. I guess that's about it. Yeah. Oh, one more thing. Yeah. A proud dad whose son just got accepted to medical school.
What?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
He's only 5 years old.
Pause button. What'd you say?
And he's only 5 years old. No. It seems like yesterday that he was 5 years old.
He's a Doogie Howser.
So where did he get accepted?
He got, well, I don't know if this is public. This is okay. He got accepted to Duke.
Fancy. That's fancy.
It's not just like any old medical school.
Well,
No.
Duke.
And he also knows a hell of a lot about autism. He's involved in the Miracle Project program out of Los Angeles, helping some of the kids to write music for a play that's coming up that's called, or it's based on, Uniquely Human.
What?
Awesome.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I can't wait to hear more about that.
Coming
Sometime.
down the line. Yep.
Yeah, sometime. I can't wait to hear about that. That's awesome. Congratulations, Barry's son.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. So thank you both for coming on. And we're going to start with Dave. And we're going to talk about Journal of Best Practices that my mom loved. My mom's favorite book now. Can you tell us everything about it? Like how it came to be that you wrote this book, your process, because it sounds like really funny and really different than anything that I've read before. So can you tell us all of the things about the book and what it's about?
Absolutely. And thank you for that. So the book is the product of a few things. One would just be this like sort of feverish writing that I had been doing. So in 2008, I was like 30. We were married. We had 2 kids, and my wife, Kristen, at the time was a speech and language pathologist, speech therapist, working primarily with kids with autism, and doing a lot of early intervention work, so birth to 3. And she was loving that, but our marriage had been falling apart. We'd been married for 5 years, and it wasn't going well because I did an awesome job sort of wooing her and courting her, because I basically just decided to act like Tom Hanks in every Nora Ephron movie ever made. And so she was like, wow, he's such a nice guy. But we had known each other for a long time, actually. We had been best friends since high school. And she's still out of my league, but in high school she was far enough out of my league that it wasn't even attainable. So it wasn't until her 20s that I was able to get in there and make it happen. But she always, I guess, enjoyed my quirkiness, she said. These are her words. And then so she thought, why not? Let's just ruin our friendship and start dating. So we started dating. And then we quickly got engaged because I wasn't going to, miss that opportunity. It was like after our 3rd date, I was actually, this right here is the ring. If you can see that there, I don't know, it's a princess cut or something, but I'm having it repaired because one of the diamond thingies fell out. I don't know. That's our blood diamond ring to celebrate our love. But sorry, so mean. But anyway,
Okay.
we got married, and pretty quickly after we moved in together, I started realizing like, well, I could keep up the facade of like a really great guy to be around indefinitely until we were living together, and I couldn't go recharge my batteries, reset or anything. I was always on. So performing. Yeah, exactly. Even performing, even though it was somebody that I had known since, we graduated from the same, actually we were the 2 of the founding members of the Joyful Noise preschool in McHenry, Illinois. So we've known each other since we were like 3, and but still performing all the time and keeping up the shtick of being like,
this great guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The shtick of being somebody worth being around.
Right.
And so then pretty soon, started to see some cracks in the old facade there. And then it was just there's a line in my book that I particularly enjoyed writing, which was, she originally loved me for the quirks, but I say quirks are like sneezes or energetic puppies. And if you can handle like one or two of them, but when your life is surrounded by them or all you're doing is sneezing, it's enough already. And it started, that was, you can handle somebody's quirks, but the stuff that was really damaging, I think, to our relationship early on in the marriage was just the rigidity, the sort of the almost mental inflexibility, and the like the persistence, I guess the insistence on a specific routine, which again you can get away with when you're dating or when it's a casual friendship or whatever.
Yeah.
But when you marry somebody and you kind of up level your relationship, you have certain unwritten obligations to their interests. It's just like,
well, you merge lives, right? I mean, that's not easy for anyone.
It's not. And the thing about being in a neurologically mixed marriage, so like she wouldn't score anywhere on an Asperger or autism evaluation, but which actually that's the next part of the story, which I think is pretty funny. But she so when you're two different cultures, like she's very neurotypical, extrovert, extremely socially, highly empathic. She's a life coach now. And so you get the idea. She's just very like, interact with humans as much as I possibly can.
Right.
And it energizes her. And her whole family is the same way too. Very social, very loving, very kind. And I grew up in this kind of like farm family where it was like, if you're going to open your mouth, you should really have something extraordinarily important to bother me with. The rest of the time, I expect everybody to not make a sound in the house. So, but when you have these two different cultures, neurotypical culture, autistic culture, and they come together in a neurologically mixed marriage, well, now you've got culture clash all over the place. And you're not only are you integrating lives, you're integrating culture. And it's misunderstandings on both sides. It's easy to point at the Asperger person and say, oh yeah, boy, they really made an ass of themselves spectacularly at the Thanksgiving dinner. But what you don't often do, I think, what people don't often do is look and say, wow, the neurotypical partner really dropped the ball on being this autistic person's partner. Yeah. Because I think there's just this assumption that there's a natural order to things and that neurotypicality is the natural order. And so any deviation from that is going to be like, well, that's out of bounds, not what we're doing, right?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So were you diagnosed already?
No, this is the funny part of the book.
Right. That's what I was thinking. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
I wasn't diagnosed, and Kristen wasn't looking at me as a what would you, diagnostician or anything. So she was just seeing me as I always was. But then she started working with kids with Asperger's, like a little bit older kids. And then as a consequence of that, meeting their parents. And she was like, oh man, like my husband, Dave, is a lot like these dads and these kids and some of these moms. So she sat me down one night because our marriage, like it got to the point where it was so tricky just being together that we didn't even feel like friends anymore. And that was just by year 4 or 5 of the marriage. It was very difficult, actually. And she said, wait a minute, I wonder if he would be on the spectrum. So she sat me down and she gave me a very informal, like the Cosmo quiz version of do you have Asperger's, right? Like it's not a diagnostic tool, but it's a weather vane saying like,
yeah,
based on our pseudoscience, this is what we think.
Almost like a Myers-Briggs type of test, like
right. Yeah, exactly. Which this thing it was called like the Aspie quiz or something, and it was 150. It was 153 questions that they somehow the rubric math worked out to be like they scored it on a 200-point scale. So I'll spend the rest of my life trying to figure out the mathematics on that.
What was the score?
The scale was from 0 to 200 Asperger points, and I scored 155. so I like knocked this thing out of the park, and then Kristen took it, and the questions on here, to give you an idea, were just very simple things. They were like, do you find it vitally important to remain undisturbed when you're focusing on something of interest? And it's like, absolutely. And I even asked Kristen, I was like, that's everybody. And she's like, think about the word vitally. Like, do you have severe behavioral outbursts if you get interrupted while you're thinking or talking? I was like, oh yeah, I guess I do. And looking around the room at all the like broken drywall, broken vases that I've like smashed. But so that was an interesting evening because she clicked like calculate your score after I answered 153 of these ridiculous questions, and it was like, yeah, you probably should get to a shrink like pronto.
Yesterday,
yeah, exactly. Like as soon as she had clicked calculate, the psychiatrist helicopter came over the house, and they were like rappelling down my wall.
We're coming. We're coming.
Untreated Aspie. Oh my gosh. So they very quickly, I'm sorry, the test results, whatever, the quiz results very quickly pointed to like, hey, you probably most likely have this if you talk to a shrink. So you might want to consider it. And I was like, I don't know if this is accurate. So I made Kristen take it, and she scored an 8, which is like,
oh
4%.
My gosh.
So I was like, well, that's that. And so then I went to see a psychologist, a licensed clinical psychologist who had her PhD. And she, because I was like, well, I want to go to somebody who really knows what they're talking about, you know. So I went to her, and she was just like, so, you know, tell me about all this. And so she did the whole thing. And I was like, yeah, that's, she said, that's about right. So I was like, cool, can I get a letter? And so she like wrote it up for me. In the letter, she said I presented with good hygiene and what was it? She had like some complimentary things to say. I was like, oh, that's very nice.
Impressive.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't know that like shrinks walked around sizing people up on their hygiene, but I guess we all do. So anyway, point is, that evening was me looking into this like computer screen and saying like, oh my gosh, like I guess I'm on the autism spectrum. And then Kristen looking at me and saying, well, like, yes, there are like, this has been really hard living with each other for the last few years, but now I don't feel like these behaviors and these different things that have been so challenging are necessarily willful. And a lot of that is just forgiven. Just like, she's like, I get your brain. Like now that I'm seeing it through this autism, she's like, it all makes perfect sense. She's like, I don't hold a grudge about any of that stuff. And so she like kissed me on the forehead and went to bed, and she like slept like a baby.
It's like y'all really have done pretty well for yourselves in terms of your relationship. Now that you look through it from a different lens, it's like, I guess we've done a great job together.
We're still a work in progress. Like we're still together. I you know, that don't want to give away the book ending, but it worked out. But so the book was published in 2012. The book really represented this little sliver of life between like 2008 and 2010 or something. But it's just the story of us working really hard to rebuild the marriage and the friendship after we had this moment of realization. I went off and said, here are the things that I want to work on to be a better husband. She went off and said, here's what I need to adjust in terms of, what do I really need out of this relationship, and what do I expect from Dave, and how can I just love him without needing him to be X, Y, or Z? And she's been working on that ever since, and I've been working ever since on just how do I show up for the family better, for my wife better, for myself better, for the kids better. So that's what we've been doing ever since then. And so that's the book. And very pleased to also relate, your mom might love this, that I'm starting with Kristen. She's a major component of this, we are starting my own podcast about this, which launches next week on April 1st. So it's an extension of the Journal of Best Practices. And it's, again, it's a comedy podcast. It's not a, this will help you in your life podcast.
Right. Don't do as we do. Please do not. This is not advice for you.
This works for us. Enjoy it, laugh about it, and maybe you'll learn something, but my intention is not to help. My intention is to amuse.
What's the website? Or, I mean, is there a website for it? There has to be.
There will be. And I can send you the link, but everything's going to launch kind of on the same day. It's just going to be like the episode, the website, and all that. The podcast is called Dave Conversations with an Idiot. And
I like that.
Just calling it what it is. And the website will be thedavepodcast.com. So was there a tiger growling just now? I thought I heard something.
I don't know I don't know. I didn't hear anything.
Okay. But so anyway, that's the gist of, like, we started as best friends because she didn't need anything from me.
Right.
I inserted myself into her life and said, I will be your husband.
You tricked her.
And then I was like, whoa. I'll be a great husband if, Kristen, you'll be exactly this model of a wife that I had constructed in my head. And when she didn't do that, I was like, well, what are we doing? Like, you're not even trying to be this perfect Disney character that I've concocted that nobody could ever be. And she was like, you're right. I'm not going to try to do that. And we diverged. We had a moment of, Kristen was like, oh, I see you. I totally see you. I was seeing you wrong until now, and now I see you. And she's like, and I love what I see. Let's go back to being friends and still be married and all that. And so we've been working on it literally every day since then. And it's good because things are great. It's gotten to the point now where when we do have an argument, first of all, it's not nearly as heated or filled with venom as they typically had been. They're very few and far between. And when we do have one, we're both like, all right, clearly something is misaligned here, because it has been a very long time since we've had this kind of dust up or misunderstanding. So that's.
Can you tell us about the Post-it notes? Don't you have Post-it notes? Can you tell us? Because my mom was like, she's just cackling over there about the Post-it notes that you write to yourself.
Yes, Post-it notes and flow charts. So here's a flow chart. How to get the kids to school, from school, swimming lessons and all that, and just like, okay, good, I got the map. The Post-it notes, I haven't done any in a while, but basically I buy empty. If anybody's like listening to this live, I basically buy blank page empty artists' notebooks that are used for like art class or something, because I don't like lines, and I just write everything down that seems important. And if it seems important, I will admit it's usually about me. So I've just got notebooks filled with like how to act better, or how to if I want to be there in 2 years, what should I do? So if I went back through all of these, like it would probably look like notebooks from a serial killer, because it's just like.
I think my mom's favorite was the one where you were like, that was like a note to yourself, and she was like, you said, saying sorry doesn't count if you're screaming it.
Apologies do not count when you shout them. That was a very important rule. So that's.
Who knew?
Thank you. That's actually, geez, we've been in this lockdown, this COVID, for over a year now. So I haven't talked about the book really at length. And I'm now remembering all these really important aspects of the book. A big part of it, it's called the Journal of Best Practices, because when I launched into this personal reconstruction journey to first try to be a better husband and then try to shore up being a reasonable human being, which is a long shot, the tactic that I used was, if something came to mind, I would immediately write it down on a scrap of paper or a Post-it note or an envelope, because a lot of times it would be in my car and I'd think like, oh, wait a minute, I probably shouldn't have made fun of that person's weight. Okay, that's why.
You write that down. Write that down.
Yeah. Like obvious things. One of the ones that usually gets a reaction out of people is don't change the radio station when she's singing along.
You did that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in my defense, she was listening to Beyonce. So what was I to do? Sit there and listen to the whole song?
Yeah, you are.
Apparently you are.
It's kind of a rule.
There was other ones like take initiative and don't seek a high five afterwards. Like just pick up the kids' laundry from the kids' rooms and put it in the dishwasher or put it in the washing machine, and then don't go downstairs to the basement and be like, "Hey, I just stepped up in the house and I did it."
Yeah, you don't get an award for that.
No, you don't get a cookie for like just living your life.
You don't.
So a lot of these are like surface level things, but there are some pretty important ones like, listen sort of actively. So as not only a guy, an engineer, and somebody on the spectrum, I just assumed that when Kristen would tell me a story that she was teeing me up to solve a problem. So I'd be like, I was late to work today. And what her girlfriends just instinctively know how to do is they're just like, I was late to work last week. Like, did anybody notice? Which to me is completely irrelevant and useless. I was thinking like, well, what route did you take? And like, you should know better because those are mostly 2-lane roads. And next time, and so she didn't want solutions. She just wanted somebody who could listen to her and, to use a phrase that a lot of like young people nowadays use, vibe with her, just like get on the same energy, like space as her and just like be a normal person. You're laughing.
I'm just imagining my teenager coming in like, don't say that. You old to say that.
Please don't use the word vibe. 43-year-olds. So those are the sorts of things that I would write down onto these scraps of paper, and I would tape them to my mirror, or I would put them like in my wallet. So every time I opened to go to Chipotle, I would open my wallet to buy something. I was like, oh yeah, that's right. I'm supposed to help out around the house. So it's, I needed to do it that way to learn by rote in a way, the sorts of things that I thought I wanted to do to step up and be a better guy. But I think it's important to point out too that was what I wanted to do. Like Kristen wasn't asking me to like write down rules for myself. In fact, knowing me, had she said that, I wouldn't have, just on principle. Right. Any rational person would say no to that on principle. So I was kind of doing it for myself just because I wanted to do better in the relationship, because I knew that I wasn't serving the relationship the way it needed to be. And then, I think for other people, it'll be a different journey. It'll be a whole different thing. But for me, that totally kickstarted and made it concrete. And then I guess the other thing too is I took it a little far. So she was like, this is so great. I'm glad that you're learning all these things you want to be doing. And then I would force her hand into performance reviews where we would like, I would project like, here's how I've been doing the last 30 days on these 3 different initiatives. And I'd put it on the wall in the bedroom with a projector, and she'd be like, I truly just want to go downstairs and watch TV.
Like with a diagram and everything, I'm guessing. A
with
flow
slides.
chart, maybe?
With slides. The same way that you would evaluate somebody in a professional corporate setting and be like, you set these goals last quarter, here's where we are. And so that's what I was doing. And she was like, live your life. I don't care about any of this. I was like, but I'm only doing it for you, so I need you to evaluate.
Right, I need an evaluation. I need some feedback and some constructive criticism. That is too funny. Oh my gosh.
So I even got trying to do right wrong. Like I even did that wrong. So you can take things too far and become more of a detriment to your own success.
It's hilarious.
Now I learned to just try to about 60% effort, which is why I'm eating a sandwich during this interview.
It is hilarious. Okay, we have so many comments. Everybody is loving this whole.
People are commenting on this. Oh, I would have watched my. I would have like portrayed myself better.
No, yeah, this is live. This is a live interview.
Oh boy. Well, let's have at it.
Let's see. Somebody said, okay. Who is Evie?
Elizabeth Vossler, right?
Yeah. That was awesome. We're gonna talk about that after. That's the third thing we're gonna talk about. I made a flow chart too for our interview. So we're gonna talk about that.
I had you pegged as a flowchart kind of gal.
Actually, I'm more of a Venn diagram type of gal. I am. Tara is in the house. Hey, Tara. Tara is with Neuroclastic. Tara said that the quiz goes up to 250 because she scored a 232.
232, and I scored a 9. Ah, nice.
Man.
So I'm still working out the math on that. 153 questions equating to 250 points.
I don't know. And maybe it was a different, I don't know if it might have been a different quiz. Who knows? And they might have updated it or whatever. Who knows?
Yeah.
Cheyenne said, hey, Cheyenne. I didn't think people really scored that low for your life.
Well, scores like 8 and 9, those are like, if you factor in margin of error, those are probably like 0% autistic. Mm-hmm. Which is weird because Kristen's such an autism whisperer. You'd think she would have some like toe in on the spectrum, but apparently not.
She was probably viewing you through the lens that she wanted to see you in too. We're probably doing it to each other. It's kind of like a normal thing to do.
Yeah. I don't want to paint a picture here that she's the only person in our marriage who did not conform to some ridiculous construct. She thought she was marrying at the time the guy who was like going out of his way to be hyper entertaining at social functions, because that's how I got through them to survive them. And then once we were married, I was like, well, I don't need to try anymore. So I don't even want to be at the
right, gotcha.
Yeah, surprise. I actually don't like drinking beers by a grill. It sounds like the worst thing I've ever heard of in my life. So and that's unfortunately she was very much duped. Maybe not.
And that's rough. Yeah, like I signed up for this guy who's going to come hang with me and all of our friends. Yes. And now you're just going to not?
Right, exactly. That's exactly what happened. But now I'm the most social person out there. On the surface.
Lisa said every marriage is a work in progress. Yes, for sure. Gosh, yes.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, the whole journey started because of this moment where an Asperger's, like, not diagnosis, but an Asperger's sort of indication made a lot of sense and seemed to clarify a lot of things for me just about my life outside of the marriage, like about my life. So that's where everything started. But the book in the end is really just a marriage book. And you could take Asperger's autism right out of this book. Mm-hmm. And it's just a couple trying to like do better.
Right. That's exactly what my mom said. She was just so relatable to like all marriages. And you are even like going above and beyond, like trying to figure out this whole like relationship thing and trying to be a better husband. And not everybody does that.
Yeah. I guess that's you got to make an effort, I guess, or you don't have to. Nobody has to do anything. But if you sort of placed bets on a relationship and you made someone else place that same bet with you, you at least owe it to the relationship to show up for it.
I liked your comment about the journal. It would be more like an empty drawer in my end table filled with notes of self-advice.
That's what my journal is. So Kristen and I just kind of jokingly called it my journal of best practices, which invokes imagery of like a true journal or something like that. But really it's just a pile of scrap paper that just existed in my nightstand. You can't really call it a nightstand drawer of best practices. That doesn't really flow off the tongue. So, or even in my car, like my car would be just littered with stuff, like with reminders. I should really go back and like pull those out and like share them on social media, the actual pictures of the best practices, because it's pretty funny. It's sort of like anybody who's ever raised little kids or pets knows how absurd it is, some of the things you have to say to them, like, don't put that frog in your mouth. It's like an absurd thing you never thought you'd have to say. And it's the same thing with me, where it's just like, don't just take what you need out of the dryer, fold all the clothes. Stuff like that.
Yeah. I'm over here like, you better fold those clothes, Dave.
See, I think a lot of wives can identify with your perspective. And I think that's why wives will read the book and then they'll elbow their husband and be like, you need to read this. And then I get
yes.
6 weeks later, I get notes from guys saying, my wife made me read your book. And, there should be a warning on the front, warning, may cause autism in married men.
Okay, well, all right. So Dave, this is, I love hearing about this book. This is amazing. I'm definitely going to read it now. Like the worst book club host ever. Like,
no, this makes you the best book club host, because I've done a number of these, and it's always like they know way more about the book than I do, even though I wrote the thing. But I love that you're like, so, okay, what's this about?
You wrote a book? Okay. Tell us about it, and I'll think about reading it. Yeah, no.
This was an autobiography of which president? Who is it?
All right, so we're gonna switch tracks, and you eat your sandwich. Let's talk about Uniquely Human, Barry. This is the first book I read that I'm gonna have to just give it. I'm gonna have to talk it up a little bit. This is the first book I read that explained what dysregulation was. I read this book 2 years after my first son was diagnosed. And we have seen so many professionals, like all of the professionals, right? And 2 years later, I read your book, and it's the first time somebody explained dysregulation to me. And it was like this lens shift happened. It was like, hold up. He's coping doing that. And he's trying to like regulate himself doing that. And I shouldn't be stopping that. I should be encouraging that and helping him grow those strategies. And it's just this like mind shift that happened when I read your book. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to turn this over to you because you're better at talking about it than I am. So tell us about Uniquely Human and how you came to write it and who it's for, what it's about, all of the things.
Sure. Okay, let's go back in history a little bit. I am a speech language pathologist, and but I like to say that my training really is in child and human development, emotional development, cognitive development, social development. So I began my career, and I say this seriously, as a camp counselor, working in residential summer camps. It was my first year in college. I was a failed German major. My German teacher said, unless you want to move to Germany, you need to find another major. So I was on parallel tracks. I was working every summer, living, sharing time, being responsible for the safety and happiness of children and adults in some cases with very challenging disabilities in many cases. And I was trying to, not so much consciously, trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do on the other side, career-wise? What am I going to do in college? So I became a psycholinguistics major, which has to do with understanding relationship between thought and communication, while I'm spending 2-3 months a year for 5-6 years in a row with people who had problems communicating, who had a lot of thoughts. I mean, I was living with these people every day, experiencing their dysregulation, because one's dysregulation impacts other people, obviously. Okay. So the whole issue for me was, as I had some wonderful mentors, and I had some wonderful mentors who were developmentalists. And I guess you could say we're talking about in the 70s, in their own way, were kind of anti-ABA, because we were all, as I became a student, as I learned more, we were all incredibly appalled by what Skinner had to say about how people learn language and to communicate, because it was wrong. And we were immersed in this research, totally disproving Skinner's theories that kids are trained to say sounds and they're trained to combine those sounds into words. And language only comes along because people reinforce them every time they imitate a sound or a word.
And you have a heavy background in early childhood as well, and it goes against every principle in early childhood. Best
That's
practices.
exactly that's exactly what happened. So as I began to be exposed more and more, and I remember one of my mentors, her name was Judy Duchan, she used to take me around to behavioral psychology seminars, and we used to debate people in terms of, they were talking about how behaviors are modified. And we say, no, we're talking about child and human development here. You can't take how behaviors are modified and say, well, that's how people develop. Sorry. Okay, so just to get off of that, for years, I was exposed to the literature, which was becoming more and more dominant at that time in applied behavior analysis. Then it was behavior modification, learning theory, operant conditioning. And I'm saying, no, this is just not right. I'm sorry, this is wrong. But I lived the experience as well because I was beginning to see kids and work with kids who had been in programs like that. As a matter of fact, I was an aide in a program, kind of an ABA program at University of Buffalo. And I remember Dr. Graziano, who's the head of the program, said, you know, we're as good as Lovas, but we're better because we don't use punishment. So I was being exposed to all of this, and it just didn't feel right. And so I took the deep dive for my master's thesis, my doctoral dissertation. And, you know, I talked too much about echolalia. I studied echolalia in my doctoral dissertation. And as opposed to it being meaningless parroting and psychotic speech, we found out it served different communicative functions. And for the majority of kids I studied over a year with video analysis, it was part of their language development. Okay, so that's the foundation. So the bigger picture is Uniquely Human came out of understanding the learning style of many people on the spectrum and kids on the spectrum. And it wasn't bizarre and deviant as all the language being used at that time. And so much of the language being used at that time was, well, we can't relate the developmental literature to kids on autism because they're not developing normally, they're developing deviantly, and it's deviant development. And that's what we have to get in there and change and extinguish.
Non-compliant.
Oh, well, and non-compliance was a big piece of it. I was writing about that in the 80s, you know, about, now, wait a second. Now I say, well, wait a second. If a goal is for all people with different disabilities to be self-determined, then isn't there a little bit of a mismatch of training non-compliance and self-determination? And I actually started seeing kids that I was consulting to who were so prompt dependent. And people were saying, well, you know, he's done really well in all of his discrete trial programs. But now that he's 12, we don't want him to have to tell us all the time he needs to go to the bathroom. He needs to be able to say that. Or we don't need to have to point to your board. Tell me how you feel. We want him to tell us how he feels. To say, well, you know, you train that possibility out of this kid.
Right.
You know?
You did that.
Exactly. And the training did that. And the thing that was kind of sad was I met so many people who were well-meaning. You know, I think there are some people out of that section of the field who are control freaks, but there are many people who are well-meaning, but that's all they knew at that time. So the Uniquely Human piece came out of stories that I used to bring home, the book actually, and tell my son and tell my wife, who's a psychologist, she works more in medical fields, all the stories. This is, you know, I just saw this great kid today, you know, and he came up to me, and this isn't in Uniquely Human, and he came up to me in the classroom and said, "Are you the autism man?" And I said, "Well, I come to see how all kids learn, and some of the kids are autistic." And he goes, "Well, you're here to see me." And I began to see all these self-determined kids who were very aware of who they were. This story is about a fourth grader, okay? And the possibilities of kids having a sense of identity and who they were was in such contrast to what was going on. So out of all of these stories, my wife used to say, I learned so much about autism. You need to put all of these stories in a book. And so one day in the shower, I was saying, yeah, that's a good idea. What would I call it? And all of a sudden, Uniquely Human came to me to kind of emphasize that to understand people on the spectrum, we have to understand all child and human development, and how some people take different paths, have different sensitivities, are more dysregulated and stressed out by certain things that so-called neurotypical people are dysregulated by, but have a lower threshold, that people on the spectrum have a lower threshold in terms of sensory overstimulation. Example of that is my wife and son are extremely hypersensitive to smell. Okay. But they could say that because, Barry, it stinks in here. Let's get out of here. Okay. And I am not hypersensitive, and I'll say, well, really, it doesn't bother me all that much. So I like to talk about the continuum where people on the spectrum have different thresholds I'm the kind of person, and I think it's one of the reasons Dave and I get along so well, is I'm the kind of person who, I start running on fumes if I'm forced to be too social too often or being in social settings. And similar to Kristen, my wife is hypersocial. She wants to know everybody online at the theater, how many kids they have, if they have kids who are in college, what colleges they go to.
And she remembers all of it, doesn't she? She remembers it all.
And the worst part is she wants to introduce me to all of those people. and I say, I really don't care. This line's waiting too long. I just want to go in and see the movie. It's like, and I love the way Dave said it. My wife's neurons, the fireworks go off when she is in social settings. She loves it. That's her neurology. But for me, not so much. So I think there's a piece of that, where I could kind of understand that continuum of being human. And going back to, the early childhood literature, there's this whole literature on children who are more socially reticent versus children who are extroverted. You could begin to pick that up in kids at 2-3 years of age by looking at their patterns of behavior. I'm not saying that this understanding that makes it easy for people on the spectrum. Being kind of on the more extreme end of sensory sensitivity, on the more extreme end of living in a very verbal social culture, poses challenges when people want you to be in the midst of that.
Well, I love how in your book you talk about, so in terms of this, you can understand, this person is introverted, this person is extroverted, and there's this continuum. And then in your book you talk about, but when parents or professionals, whoever, get this autism diagnosis, it's as if they just freak out, and it's like they don't trust anything that they knew before, and they lose trust in themselves to be their parents or their teacher. As soon as the word autism comes into the picture, it's we don't know what we're doing anymore. We don't understand anymore.
Yeah. I had I didn't have a lot of intentional goals in writing Uniquely Human. But one intentional goal I did have was to help parents trust their own intuitions and instincts. Because for years I had seen those being violated by professionals saying, oh, when he kind of looks at his fingers like that, you have to put his hands down, quiet hands, because it's going to make him more autistic. And I give an example in the book of a child who kind of stepped back and forth with his fingers in front of his face. And a therapist told the parents, when he does that, tell him to sit on his hands. This is a 4-year-old. Tell him to sit on his hands, quiet hands, stop it. And it
happened to one of my friend's children 2 years ago at a center.
It still happens.
Sit on the hands.
And I said to the parents, well, what do you think it is? And they said, we call it his happy dance. And you could just see the pain when they said that. It's the worst thing I think that could happen to a parent of any child, whether it's an adopted child, a biological child, is to be told, don't trust your own instincts about raising your child, because then they're always second guessing themselves. So that was an intentional goal. And I wanted parents to feel that, certainly the guidance of professionals can be very, very helpful. But, the old cliche, You may not be an expert on autism, even though many parents are now, self-taught, but you are an expert on your child. And the important thing is that you develop that trusting relationship. And I don't want you as a professional to do things with your child that lead your child not to trust you.
If it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't right. And yeah, I got that from your book. I got it.
So getting back to the dysregulation piece, the major goal there was, in terms of being a developmentalist, I began to write and look into the literature on emotional regulation in the 1990s. And now it's one of the hottest areas of research in the research areas in autism. There's a Stanford University has a emotional regulation research institute in autism. Okay. But I began to get exposed to this by my work in infancy and infant development. I said, wait a second. Everybody in autism talks about behavior management, okay, controlling the behaviors, extinguishing the behaviors. And then when I was exposed to all of the research on emotional regulation, saying, this is a framework that explains why kids have, and I hate the phrase, those behaviors. Let's talk about this child's emotional experience, sensory experience. Let's talk about, this leads to your initial question. Let's talk about why he's staring at his fingers when the classroom gets a little noisy and crazy. It's his way to try to stay regulated and hold all of that craziness out there. Why does she bolt out of the classroom when the teacher starts to get angry and kind of reprimanding the class? Well, she can't deal with those strong emotions. It goes right through her. And so she needs to get out of there as a shield against that. And
it's
so
functional. It's functional. It's coping. It's
strategies that sometimes work and sometimes do not work. But as one of my colleagues, Amy Lorenz, says, my colleagues in the CERTS model, it's a starting point. The starting point is, what's the regulatory function of that behavior? And then we go on to, is it seem to be working for him? If he's rocking in morning meeting, in kindergarten, but he's able to listen to the teacher and sing the song, it's working for him or her. Okay. But in some cases, it may not be working and may lead to unfortunate circumstances. So I know there's mixed feelings about this, but we feel that some forms of self-injurious behavior start out as attempts to regulate, like sucking your fingers or mouthing your arm for the sensory input. But then when the stress gets too great, the need for the intensive input gets too great, which can result in self-harm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I also wanted, with Uniquely Human, to tell the stories that people can chuckle about, that people can say, oh my goodness, if I would say that to somebody who knows nothing about autism or who doesn't know my family, they're going to say, oh my God, that's terrible. But if I say that to, a parent or somebody within the autism culture, they'll say, oh, sure, yeah, that happens to us. Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. And, we've had this parent retreat for 24 years, this parent retreat weekend. And the parents laugh as much as they cry, connecting with people where they don't have to explain themselves, or they don't have to make excuses for their child's behavior, because everybody kind of gets it. And that's the other great influence of the book, Uniquely Human. Everything that I've learned from parents as well as children, and of course, over the last 15, 20 years, my friends, my colleagues who are on the autism spectrum, such as Dave. I mean, I'm like a sponge. Every opportunity, every interview we do on our podcast, I'm like a sponge, just taking it all in. And one thing I do like to say, now that I have a little bully pulpit right here, I know there are people out there, and people have said this about my book, about Steve Silberman's book, Neurotribe. Steve's a very close friend. Well, it's nice they wrote that, but these books should be written by autistic people, because these people have no right to talk about the lived experience of autistic people. And I finally came up with a response that's accurate, and I think it's helpful. And that is, I am not, and Steve is not, a person talking about the lived experience of autistic people. We are talking about our lived experience in sharing time with and learning from autistic people, and seeing how often they're misunderstood and how often they're mistreated. So this is my lived experience, and all I could do is cross my fingers and say, I hope it resonates. I hope people on the spectrum say, yeah, Barry, a fair amount of this I think you got right by my educated guesses by being with people on the spectrum. And I hope and pray that every professional out there can kind of take that attitude that I've learned, and I'm still learning over 40 years, and that say, you have a wealth of possibility about learning by being in relationship with, rather than standing outside and judging or putting everything a person does in a category of desirable or undesirable, or thinking that your job is to fix or to train out,
right,
or even to train what you think is important for that person to learn if they don't think that way.
Yeah, I remember Steve saying something like that when you came on. He said that one of the things that was hardest to hear was like somebody saying, I loved your book. It was amazing. I just wish you didn't write it. Like, I wish you weren't the one that wrote it. And it was, I remember him saying that.
Yeah.
And you are writing from your perspective and from what you've learned, and also from your, not professional training, your, what do you call it? School and
philosophy.
Yeah. Like learning through school and stuff.
Yeah. Like formal learning. Yes.
Formal. Thank you. Formal.
Yes. Yeah.
I will say also, as somebody on the spectrum, I cannot thank Barry and Steve and some others enough for I don't care who wrote Barry's book. The content of the book is transformative, revolutionary, which is why I wanted to do this work with him, this podcast. It's just like a blessing to be able to do it because, I'm also a creative consultant on Atypical, this show.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And similar thing where it's like, well, do they have, I hope that every writer in that writer's room is autistic. It's like, do you really? Because first of all, there's no way that you can get that many people who are in a writer's union, who are the right writers for the show, who are also available, to then put one more parameter on it and say they all have to be autistic. It's completely impractical. But they brought me in because they wanted to make sure that they were trying to be as sensitive as possible with the staff that they had to the autistic experience, and they knew they weren't the experts in that. And I don't know, I can read a book about French cuisine, get a lot from it if it was written by somebody from, Ohio, who's not French. And it wouldn't particularly bother me that the person wasn't a French author.
We have a response. Go ahead, Barry.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I do understand where that sentiment is coming from, okay? Because for how many decades have non-autistic professionals been writing about autism and getting it wrong?
Absolutely.
But getting it wrong in a disrespectful way. So I understand where that's coming from, but I think we also have to look at what people are writing and saying, is it respectful? Is it humble in saying we don't know everything? Okay. And also saying, listen, I'm not a person on the spectrum, but this is what I'm observing, and this is what my friends on the spectrum tell me. So,
I get that. Hold on. Where did it go?
Yeah, there was
a big one. Here we go. I believe that books written by non-autistic people who interact with, listen to autistic people are so important. Perhaps sadly, people seem more inclined to listen to non-autistics more readily. Non-autistic allies are important.
Yes. Yeah. And of course, actually I looked ahead at one of your last questions, and that is advice for parents. And I'm one of the first people to say, read books by autistic authors, go listen to autistic people speak, go online. It is so important. That's how I do my learning. So of course parents can do their learning that way.
Yeah. And this is Ira was just on the other week. All of my weeks are blurring together. But with that said, I do think non-autistic people have a responsibility to lift up autistic people's voices and pay them for their work. So
Absolutely.
Yeah. And maybe I'm being a little defensive with this reaction, but we've had a fundraising conference for our parent retreat for close to 20 years. And going back to the 90s, we've always had an autistic person speak on our programs. Our parent retreat, this is a weekend spent with parents of autistic children and autistic adults. We bring in autistic people to speak to the parents. Dave has come to our parent retreat.
Cool.
So create those opportunities for that close-up contact and learning from autistic people. Absolutely.
Someone had, hold on. It's so many comments. I'm sorry if I don't get to everything.
We want to talk about the podcast too soon. So
there was, let's see. Oh, we're about to talk about this right now. Dave, I love the way you understood and believed in Ian as he spelled with EV. It doesn't seem difficult to believe in non-speaking people's unique communication, but so many people deny it's authentic. That's, oh gosh.
So if you heard this episode of the podcast, this non-speaking young man, Ian, was so much fun. Like I wish people could have seen it on the Zoom, just the jokes that he was laughing at. Like I like anybody who gets my jokes. But, I asked Barry after the conversation with him, which, by the way, the reason I love this podcast with Barry, one of the reasons is, like, we'll do a 45-minute or an hour-long conversation with somebody who's non-speaking in the traditional sense. And it was, like, easily one of our best conversations that we've ever had,
for sure.
Which is maybe counterintuitive. But the everything that he shared with us was so deliberate and meaningful and emphatic, because he had to go through 1,000 times the effort that I would have to go through just to get it out. And after we had that conversation with him, I asked Barry, this was in the episode, I think, it was like, I heard the word like controversy or dark underside, or at some point in the interview, this red flag hit me. I was like, and Barry explained to me that there are people who will poo-poo the efforts of people like Ian, who are using a board to point to, and I'm watching it with my own eyes. It's not like he was just, dancing with his hands, and the interpretive person who was with him was just making stuff up and saying, like, oh, look, Ian definitely wants to make me a milkshake right now. So, like, it was one for one, like his idea, the same way that if you watched me write an idea down in my notebook and the words come out of the pen, it's as legitimate as anything I've ever seen. So I'm shocked.
Ansel has made some really bad decisions lately. I mean, I know that's your people, Barry.
Wait, what did you say? I didn't hear the first part.
I said that Asha has been making some really poor decisions lately. Like,
oh wow.
I mean, they came out against facilitated communication and spelling to communicate. And so now, like, my son is mostly non-speaking, and we're working on typing and doing all of the things.
Uh-huh.
And, I'm looking for a communication partner to be at school with him. And because of Asha's position on it, I mean.
Yeah, I submitted a long protest letter to Asha. Because it's I've received honors of the association, okay, which is kind of like a person who's been around a long time, and they value, and I sent a very, very direct, strongly worded protest against their position statements. But let me just share something with you that's actually right on this point, and I'll also put in a shameless plug for our podcast.
Yeah, we have to get to the podcast.
we interviewed Julia Bascom, the executive director of the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, a few weeks ago. And the podcast will be out tomorrow. And I'm going to quote something she said, because during the podcast, we spoke about what she refers to as the vitriol about non-speaking people and all the people who speak up against that this is just pseudoscience and it's false and on and on. And here's what Julia said. I quote, "Society thinks about disability as this bad thing, but disabled self-advocates know that disability is a normal part of the human experience. There is so much vitriol because too many people believe that non-speaking people are not fully human. So they do not know how to respond to non-speaking people being portrayed as or demonstrating that they are fully human and intelligent.
Yeah.
And so what I agree 100%. It's there are people who've invested their careers in, if you will, assuming incompetence, as opposed to assuming competence. And we're challenging their very basic belief systems about the potential, the abilities of people who are non-speaking or any people with disabilities who are standing right in front of us. And that's a tough pill for them to swallow, but damn it, they better swallow it because the times are changing.
Right. That. All of that.
It is.
Swallow it.
Why would you look at somebody? I've got this thing makes my life living amongst you all really hard. I'm fine on my own, but as soon as I have to be around you people, it makes my life harder. I'm going to do this thing that I stumbled upon that actually makes it much easier for myself to kind of be around you all. And then you all tell me, no. That's, what do you know? Like, that's not a legitimate way to communicate with us. Who said that's almost psychopath, like psychotic behavior? That's insane to me.
It's really bad. And I don't know, did you see, I think it was last week. I don't know what week it is. Did you see Danny Whitty come on in the book club?
No.
He's mostly non-speaking, and he only just recently, a few years ago, learned to spell, to communicate with EV, learn with her. And he's like my age-ish, like 30-ish. 30, 40. I don't even know how old he is, but just learned how to do that with EV. And I said, well, Danny, how did you communicate before? Like, how are you doing that? And he's like, not very well. Like, and he's like way smarter than me. Like, he developed PowerPoint presentations for this book club meeting. And like, I asked him for like a few, questions in advance. And damn if he didn't write out chapters, like, like powerful, like you were saying, Dave, like every word was so meaningful. And it's like, Asha just wants to like take that away from people. Like, you just don't want them to be able to do this. Like, why do you care? First of all,
right?
Is it hurting you?
Right.
Well, what's so disconcerting for me about this is, my profession also deals and supports people who've had strokes, people who have neurological differences of different types. So we know a lot about people who can understand what you're saying, okay, who have a lot to say, but are not able to say it until we find the right connection and the right modality. I think some people in augmentative communication in my profession are very much, and let's give them credit for this, in the high-tech realm, and they want to understand, well, why would they want to just spell? Why wouldn't they use, a device with word prediction? And why wouldn't they use all these high-tech things? And Ian, who we interviewed, prefers to spell. Yeah. He likes to be in relationship with a person when he's communicating with them.
Yeah.
And that's totally understandable to me. But I mean, we're talking about a human right as well. Don't you have the right to choose the way that you want to communicate because it's most effective for you?
Yes, absolutely. And by the way, there's another thing that I didn't know anything about the ASHA thing. I'm canceling my subscription to the ASHA leader.
Well, that's not the that's not the only thing they've done recently. But okay.
No, but the other thing that I observed in my first ever conversation with somebody who was non-speaking, and we actually spoke, Ian and I talked about this for a second, is the discipline it takes to adopt that modality, I guess we'll say, of communication. With that comes a tremendously positive impact of enhanced emotional regulation.
Yes.
Like, he's reinforcing and strengthening the habit of emotional regulation as he's doing it in real time. And it just is another great outcome, I think.
Yeah.
I'm no scientist, but.
Well, I mean, one of the things I was most impressed by, I first met Ian, and I'll call her Elizabeth, not Evie, because I'm used to calling her Elizabeth. I was invited to University of North of Virginia 3 years ago just to give a talk on Uniquely Human, but I spent 2 days with the tribe. The tribe is a group of non-speaking autistic adults who hang out together, who attend classes at University of Virginia to share psychology classes, to share their experiences with people on the spectrum. And the first thing that struck me when I was over 2 days, I shared some time for a couple of hours each day with members of the tribe. And the thing, as far as directly with them, sitting at a table conversing, the thing that struck me was how well regulated they were. And then Elizabeth and some of the members of the tribe shared with me how dysregulated they were when they were young, and how they were considered to be aggressive or out of control. And they all spoke about problems in controlling their bodies, especially when dysregulated. And this, if you study neurology and dysregulation, this is no surprise. If you study what it takes at a neurological level to be able to form the words for speech, it's totally understandable that people with neurological differences, some of them, are going to have problems doing what's considered the finest motor coordination that a human being does, and that's speech. So it blows me away that people in my profession can't bring that into autism and say, we know about all these people with neurological differences who can't speak, but that doesn't mean they're not intelligent. It doesn't mean they don't have a lot to say. I just don't understand that.
I don't either. There you go. Barry pretended not to see the last one, Tara. You noticed that, and so now Tara's not going to stop. She's going to.
Well, let me say this. I know Howard Shane. I've known Howard Shane for decades, and I do respect a lot of the work that he's done in augmentative communication. I think he's surrounded himself with a terrible group of some non-speech language pathologists. We could say it, who are dyed-in-the-wool behavior analysts.
I was just about to say, in the behaviorist realm.
And radical behavior analysts who believe, one of them wrote an article that what's wrong with, there's everything wrong with assuming competence. The article's about why we should assume incompetence. And I always go back to, I'm curious about the last time that any one of these people have spent more than a half hour in a non-clinical setting with a person on the spectrum.
Right.
Schmoozed with them, hung out with them.
Right.
Went out to eat with them.
Without a professional agenda informing every interaction.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. So we have to get to the podcast. The podcast is amazing. Uniquely Human podcast. You have all of these guests, and you had Marinike was just on. I don't know what week we're on. It's like a theme throughout this book club meeting that I don't know what week we're on. Marinike was on. Elizabeth Fossler and Ian were on. You've had Steve Silverman. Who else? Tell us all about the podcast.
Oh, just a few more names we'll toss out, and then, let me talk about the topics that we could pull in some of the names. Our goal, and I guess I'm speaking for Dave now, so you could chime in, was to really, cover the broad landscape. So, including podcasts that are not on yet, we're covering everything from the arts and autism to sexuality issues to non-speaking people to social stories with Carol Gray, and hoping to clear up a lot of the misunderstandings about social stories, because Carol's getting a lot of flack these days. You mentioned Steve Silberman. We've had Temple Grandin on, understanding that some people who are on the spectrum don't fully agree with what Temple says these days. Oh my goodness. Go ahead, Dave. You have better company than I do.
No, I think one of the best things about working with Barry, and here's another flow chart, why it's great to work with Barry. There's just a lot of reasons. But one of the best things about working with him, especially on this podcast, is that he, from day one, has said when we were coming up with the idea for what the show would look like, sound like, feel like, what it would be for an audience, how it would help people. He insisted on I really want to be amplifying the voices of individuals on the spectrum, and I want to be having sometimes biased, but certainly always fair conversations with people who aren't, speaking on behalf of the majority of autistics out there, at least the more vocal ones, and who's to say, right? And so Barry has, in his career, gotten to know, I feel like, everybody on Earth. I've spent my life trying to not get to know people, and he's taken a different tack. And so just his Rolodex is filled with all of these fascinating, very smart people who have a very clear line on things and can articulate it like crystal clearly. The very first guest we ever had, I was making a joke with her. She's going to be like our Joan Rivers. We're going to have her, like, she'll always be our first guest, and we'll always have her back.
Who is it?
It was a young woman named Chloe Rothschild. And Chloe was, I always say the phrase wrong. Was she speech impaired, speech inhibited, or something? It took her a while, right? But now she is a very important and vocal advocate, especially around healthcare issues for people on the spectrum, and people on the spectrum having a sense of agency about their own healthcare destiny. It's and the people who don't consider themselves to be autistic, although a couple of them have been like, really? But the people who don't carry around diagnosis with them, who have been guests, have also just had the most informed, sensitive, and thoughtful narrative around autism neurodiversity, and it's every episode we do. We put a lot of thought and a lot of work into making sure Barry and I know exactly why we're chatting with someone. It's never just, oh, they were available, let's get them on the horn,
Yeah.
But everyone we do, we sign off and we say, thanks for joining us, all right, bye. And then they leave, and then Barry and I stick around on the Zoom call for a second. And every time we're like, that was amazing.
Yeah, right. I know the feeling. That's what I'm going to do. Like, after we're off, I'm going to be like, oh my gosh. I'm going to be in the book club and doing my GIFs of like passing out, like, oh, that was amazing. Yeah, I know
Barry was
feeling.
amazing, and he's being weighed down by this idiot below him. But
we have to talk about enthusiasms a bit.
Oh yeah, I'll let you do that. Yeah.
Okay, sure. When we were putting this together, and by the way, the first time I met Dave live, because we had spoken on the phone, was at a conference called Love and Autism. So that's very fitting, right? In San Diego. Yes. But we decided, we're going to have interviews, but we want to have certain segments. And we came up with a list of segments, most of which we don't do. But one that we do is Enthusiasm of the Week, which is not accurate because we don't get it on every week. Because, for example, Julia Bascom's interview is long, but it's so great we didn't want to pull stuff out of it. So we skipped the enthusiasm. But enthusiasms are having either people on the spectrum or parents tell us what they absolutely love, if you want to use terms, deep interest, passions. And we've had kids on who've spoken about their enthusiasm. We've had adults on the spectrum talking about, my enthusiasm is driving cars, and I do DMV vehicle car testing for the DMV of California, and I've done 10,000 car tests in the last few weeks.
That's freaking amazing. Like, perfect.
Yeah. And so that has been fun. And in some cases, which is really gratifying for me, the parents want to come on because they read Uniquely Human. And they talk about, recently we had a mom who said, I'm going to just begin to cry because we were told so often that my son's interest in dominoes needed to be extinguished. because he got so focused on it. And we learned about enthusiasms. We now have another word and concept for it. And now when he comes home from school, this is how he regulates. He chills out and he plays with his dominoes for an hour. And then he's ready to go on with life at home. And now my husband, who really had difficulty connecting and playing with him, they connect over dominoes and they have this wonderful relationship, and that's what I love. I love when I hear from the parent perspective saying that what we're learning from the podcast, and another thing about this, I'm going to go off on a little tangent here. A lot of parents of young kids are not exposed to the whole world of autism. They're so focused on the educational program, which therapy do I choose, that because they've read Uniquely Human, now they're hearing so many autistic adults for the first time in some cases. And it's opening up their world. And so I think what we're doing with the podcast, again, is not saying we have the absolute truth about autism, but we want to expose as many people as possible to the culture and the world of autism who may not be easily exposed to that.
Yeah, absolutely. The enthusiasm segment is, again, one way that you can amplify the voices of people on the spectrum is to have them on. If you happen to be a person who has a podcast, you can bring them on the show. Another way to do it is to go kind of visit them in their home, so to speak, and hear in their words, like, what is it that you love about marine life? And like, when did this start? And the kid's like, well, it started when I was 2. And he goes off into this, it sounds like a well-written, like, doctoral thesis. And the kid's like 8 years old or something. I was like, who are we talking to? So we're meeting really fun, really cool people. And being able to, I think one of the big segments that we never do.
I love that all of these things that we just never do.
We'll do those in the, we'll get the first 3,000 episodes under our belt. Then we'll start looking at but one of the things that Barry, it was very important to you, and I'm kind of putting words in your mouth, but I admired this from the get-go. It was really important to you that we continually are reframing things that, get an unfair shake in autism, or things that people just don't quite understand or don't have the whole story on, whether that's enthusiasms or, the behaviors, reframing the language. We had an episode recently on language, which was really eye-opening for me because I'm such a smart aleck. Like, I'll just say anything, but Barry made a strong case for, like, well, it pays to be very not just calculated, but conscious and, like, thoughtful about the words you're using and the jargon, and for professionals in relation to not only the autistic individual, but maybe their parents as well. And creating a culture of safe evaluation and safe discourse, as opposed to judgmental or unfair.
Reactive.
A good example of that, Megan, is what you mentioned earlier, the term noncompliance. I mean, you think about the repercussions of overusing that term, which it's terribly overused in ABA, is that, first of all, it's inaccurate. It's not precise. Yes, you may ask a child or a person to do something and they may not do it, but there could be 10 different reasons. It may be they're afraid to do it.
It's a judgment. Yeah, you're judging their actions by what you think it is. Look, I have a chart over here, Dave. You want to see it?
I do.
You see my chart?
I was looking at the, yes.
It's a T chart.
I love it. I'm trying to read. What's above it?
I like where?
The one, it's like it's written here? In a cloud. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's an iceberg for Dr. De La Hook's book. Dr. Milner's book,
the behavior on the surface and everything going on underneath.
Mm-hmm.
That's what regulation's about, yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I often will say with the Beyond Behaviors book, I feel like I promote her book all the time. But like this is like the 101, like getting parents to, like, just get that lens shift and introduce them to this other way of thinking, like all of that stuff that they told you, just it was a bad dream, baby. Just, put it in the trash can and go to the park. Like, let's regroup here, right? That's Barry's book. And then everything that Barry talks about in here, Dr. Mona goes into like it even more in depth. So if this is like the 101, that's like a 303 college course. You know what I mean? Like it's the same stuff, but it's just more in depth and, yeah.
It's the problem is what I call blaming a person for their disability that we know about. When I consult and people are saying, well, he's being non-compliant, or that's just escape motivated behavior, or on and on and on, I'll say, can we talk about that from maybe what the child's or the person's experience is? Because as long as we're using those terms, we're essentially blaming this person. I'll sometimes say, do you believe that this person has neurological differences that causes more challenges? Oh, yeah, of course. I believe that. Okay. Well, by saying that, you're kind of blaming them for their behavior that's due to those neurological differences. What's wrong in this picture? It's just so important.
And can I just say, I forgot, the podcast, I just wanted to tell y'all that when it comes on, it's like the beginning of the Mr. Rogers program. Next time you listen to your podcast and the music comes on and then Barry's like, hello, my name is Barry Prizant. The next phrase should be, welcome to my neighborhood.
We're going to have a lot of fun today.
I do have to say that helps me understand because, even yesterday I was speaking to a mom of a 3-year-old it's a long story. I'm not going to get into it, but it's somebody I know through a very deep personal connection. And she happened to have a child who was diagnosed a year ago. And she said to me, it's so relaxing listening to you and Dave. And people have said this, that I love the flow, the back and forth flow between the two of you. I love the fact that you like each other so much.
It's very soothing and gentle and just like it's serene almost. It's very serene. I like it.
Well, maybe we should call it Mr. Finch's neighborhood.
Yes.
I'll put on a sweater and tie my shoes and we'll get started. Part of that
fish.
A big part of the soothingness is just Barry's command of the subject matter. It's sort of like listening to a
edge off.
Totally. It's like, oh, hey, we got some turbulence, right? And on the plane, and then the pilot comes back, is like, what would you like to know about turbulence? You're like, oh, wow, this is calming. But another thing
tell you about turbulence and the statistics and all of the things.
Cue the music.
Well, let me come right back at Dave here. What another thing that people comment on, and by the way, if listeners listen to the podcast, please give us feedback. We have a survey. We have, you could just put your comments on our website. But people talk about they like not the humor in a frivolous way, but they like the fact that in every discussion, it could be, a fairly serious and even not often, but sometimes a darker discussion. We come back to a lighter tone. And so what I want to thank Dave for is, and I mean this quite sincerely, he is so spontaneously witty in such an intelligent way that he forces me to reach that bar. I don't think of myself as a funny person spontaneously. He's teaching me how to kind of reach his level. And again, not just to be ridiculous, but just to lighten the load a little bit when it's important to have listeners chuckle, laugh a little bit, and stay with us.
Relax a little bit. It's not, just relax a little. Yeah.
Yeah.
I see the change in you, Barry.
Yeah.
I'm just messing with y'all. No, I love it. No, I do.
Barry's opening up at the Funny Bone Comedy Club in St. Louis this weekend.
I guess I have more chuckles per 5 minutes as compared to my last visit to the Austin Book Club.
Yeah. And well, I don't even know if you know this, Barry, but you were my very first interview.
I didn't know that.
Oh, wow.
I had interviewed Michaela Ackerman before, but Michaela and I are friends, right? So we've talked before, like that's different. Barry was my first interview. I didn't tell him that because I didn't want him to be like, why am I even here? This, so, I had to act like I had it together.
I hope I was a good first interview.
It was great.
Great.
It was fantastic.
Yeah, you launched this massive book thing with thousands and thousands of.
but then again, it comes back. I first heard Marenike on a wonderful interview you did with her.
Yeah,
that was fantastic.
And obviously, when we ask people, who do you want us to invite, what topics, intersectionality issues, people, different races, gender identities, all of this came into play. And so we're working, non-speaking was a big request. Mm-hmm. So we are working down the line of what people are saying. I hope you could represent a person who could well represent these issues on the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I need to get to our final question, and then if y'all want to circle back on anything, we can. But sure. Dave, did you get the email?
Yes.
Did you read? Okay. Dave doesn't like to respond to emails. I'm just putting it out there. I mean, we all have our things, Dave. It's okay. And I accept you for that.
Yeah, it can be a little tricky sometimes. But now that I know you and we've made a connection, I think you can expect to receive at least one response every couple weeks.
What?
What?
Okay.
So, as I recall, in the email, it was advice for parents, yes?
Wow.
Yes.
All right.
Okay, so here's the question. If you could give one piece of advice to the parents of a newly diagnosed autistic child, what would it be?
I'm going to let Barry, who clearly has the better answer, back cleanup on this one.
It's a safe bet.
Yeah, and I'm going to say that when I read the question, the very first thing that came to me was, as much as you can, find your tribe. And that's true of not only if you're the parent of a newly diagnosed child on the spectrum, find the tribe for the child, certainly, but find your own tribe too, because there is so much misinformation, misunderstanding, infighting, bickering. You should point to a board. You shouldn't point to a board. I mean, it's on. And just having your tribe, and you'll find them in unlikely places, but find them and nurture those relationships, because you're going on a journey too. It's not just your child.
It's like a safe space for yourself. Yeah,
Exactly.
It's great.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. Barry?
Sure. This is more like advice for belief, and that is that your child has unlimited potential. That development is lifespan. We are all developing. I'm approaching my 70th birthday, and I'm learning new stuff all the time. And the reason I'm saying that is kind of a preventative inoculation, against, your kid's going to hit this ceiling if he doesn't learn so much by 5 years of age, or the can't do reports, or will never be able to do reports. And that goes hand in hand with finding your tribe. Speaking to parents a little bit ahead of you in the journey who say, oh yeah, we got that also, just don't believe it. Mm-hmm. I'm still amazed at the negative prognostic stuff that goes on. I'm still amazed, that parents get, which makes them walking on eggshells the whole time that they're trying to develop a relationship with their child. So that's, believe in your child, believe in yourself, and make those connections that help you validate your beliefs.
That's great. Thank you both for that.
Of course.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. I hope it's helpful for people.
Yeah.
I love the question because everybody has a different answer. Like, I don't think any two people have had the same answer before. And I think we've done this question about 30 times now. So it's great to.
I like where you're dropping people in on the timeline of that question too. Like newly diagnosed is when it's just what, and you, I don't know, there's still this thing in culture, society, whatever, that says like, well, that's shocking. I think because it is a diagnosis, it's not like, oh, my son is left-handed and what do I do now? I've got a left-handed kid. It's, I think this is a time when the right guidance from people like Barry or from, that's when you need to hear it the most, and really hold on to it as a kernel of truth.
For sure. And I mean, it's funny because like when my kids were little and we didn't have a diagnosis, like I'm pushing for this diagnosis, right? Like just the answers, you know what I mean? Like what's happening. My kids were preemies, so they were always delayed. It was just like, we just didn't know what was happening. And so, I'm taking doctor's appointment, like, what do I do? And we finally got this answer, right, of autism. It didn't answer anything. Like it was like just open up a whole nother bag of worms. It's like,
yes,
what does that mean? And the answers they gave me were not helpful at all, but it took a while, but so that's like that new parent that's like, all right, got this diagnosis, what are we going to do with it? And it's overwhelming.
Yeah. How old are your kids right now?
Those two are 7.5.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
And I can't place your southernness. Where do you live, or where were you brought up?
Well, right now I live in Virginia Beach.
Anyway.
Yeah. But I'm from about an hour and a half west of here in the country.
Yeah. I was going to say, I'm almost hearing West Virginia, but not like big West Virginia.
No, just rural Virginia. Nat Turner. Have you ever heard of Nat Turner?
Sure.
That's where I'm from.
Ah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I didn't know it was a city. I thought it was a jazz musician.
Ah.
Are you? But so in like Virginia has an adequate infrastructure to deal with new parents and diagnoses, or are you getting people in on a timely manner? Or
Virginia is actually I don't know if you're familiar like with the whole Navy setup, but Virginia, my area, has its EMFP or something. It's where if a family gets a diagnosis of autism or something else, they send them here. Like we're one of the 3 bases they send them to. So we actually have a huge community, and we have a very active, not social group, but like family group. Like we have a great family group, and we get together all the time, and we have this huge community here. It's amazing. I know that we're lucky in that aspect, but they get people in on time, but still, like most of the doctors are still using that, like give me give me a book to read, like nothing. You know what I mean? Like just well, that's autism, and it's done. It's like, okay, bye. And then there's no information. There's no like, oh, did you know that there's autistic adults too? Mm-hmm. It took me 2 years to find that out.
Right, exactly.
I don't know. Yeah. So it's still a little, we got to still have work to do.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Well, that's why we have people like you two who are like doing the work.
Yeah. And I think sometimes doing the work means being direct. That, if a person on a diagnostic team or if a physician kind of dumps the diagnosis on you and says, okay, my work's done, bye. I think we need to say, well, that's not helpful. I mean, what about resources? We need to have people change their ways. I mean, it's that simple. And sometimes if they one person or one parent says it, then maybe, okay, that's just an anxious parent. But if more and more people begin to say it, wait a second, you are a service provider. You are here to help me. Let me tell you what would help me. But just doing this with a stop doesn't help me at this point.
Right.
Yeah. It's so true.
Yep.
Is there anything else y'all want to talk about? Because I've had y'all on for almost 2 hours now.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to talk about, I'll do this quickly, is actually about the podcast. And I think that because this is really a good illustration of neurodiversity at work, okay? That it's what I like to refer to the yin yang of my relationship with Dave and Dave's relationship with me, okay? So you heard him picking up on subtleties in your accent, for example. So Dave has superpowers when it comes to auditory perception. And I mean, he makes our podcast sound incredible. It's a professional.
It does. It really does.
I mean, and that's because of Dave. He is an autistic person who is not, maybe this podcast is doing it, but who has not been immersed in the politics of autism, and all of that piece of it. So being a neurotypical and my connections and interests, I'm kind of bringing some of the politics of autism into our podcast. So at some point, Dave, you're going to make a chart of the Barry Dave yin yang piece.
A Venn diagram for our friend Megan.
Venn diagram. Yes.
But then the other piece is we are both so busy with our day jobs that we needed to hire a part-time person. So we have a wonderful assistant named Taylor, and she cracks the whip on us.
Oh, good.
You know, in terms of, okay, you want to get the podcast out by Friday, then this needs to be done by this, and this needs
Somebody needs to do that, yes.
And so that speaks to the interdependence piece. You know, we can't even do our podcast independently. We need to bring in a person who is like, you know, an executive function expert. And she keeps us online, telling us what we need to do, when we need to do it. And it works with the two of us. So there's a wonderful, I know we know of yin yang, but is there a third part to that triangle?
Venn diagrams, you can have 3 of them. You can have 3 circles, and they can all intersect, and then 2 of them can intersect. It's yes, you can do all of that. She's her job is the executive functioner.
Yes,
executive.
That's gonna be her job title.
Chief
I'm the executive functioner.
Yeah. And the funny thing about that, which is unexpected, is she's an out-of-work dancer and choreographer because Broadway is shut down.
Yeah.
So she lives in New York City. I live in Rhode Island. Dave lives in Denver. And we all come together like this.
It's awesome. Yeah. Amazing.
It is. It's a lot of fun because, again, you know, my only expertise in any of this is that I'm on the spectrum. But to be able to access Barry's wisdom after 40 years of, you know, doing everything he can to understand autism and autistic people, it is a really fun partnership.
Yeah,
it sounds great.
We have a lot of laughs.
Yeah, I can tell.
Yeah.
Well, I had an amazing time. Is there anything else that y'all want to talk about?
No, thank you so much for having us on. This is awesome. I feel like privileged to be part of the show.
Yeah.
Me too. I swear, I feel like that every time. It's like, I mean, I told you, I just fangirl it all the time. Like, this has been amazing for me as well. So, and thank you all for joining us. I'm sorry I couldn't get to all of your comments. Barry's in the group. Dave.
I'm actually logging into, is it Facebook where I do this?
Yes, it is.
I'm logging in right now because I remember at one time being in the group, but I'll join in.
No. But yeah, so thank you all for coming. This was great. And thank you, Cheyenne. Thank you, Lisa, Tara, Angelina. Thank you, Angelina, for putting all the links up, and Kimberly, everybody. Y'all hang on real quick. I'm going to end the broadcast, and I will see y'all next week with another person, and I can't remember because I just can't. It's the weeks thing. Okay, bye, y'all.
Bye-bye. Thank you.